Well, frankly, it was his personality and his behavior. This new government is an across-the-board government. It's got, for the first time, Arab members, actually Islamists, ranging from them to leftists to people to the right of Netanyahu. The common denominator, other than people wanting to be in government, was getting him out. I don't know if it was as much the corruption and the scandals. It was more the high-handedness, the behavior as if he was somehow above the law, and the fact that people don't trust him. The settlement issue is going to be a real challenge for the new prime minister, Naftali Bennet. He's got to somehow placate both his left and his right and the Arab members who are supporting him. So if you're Bibi Netanyahu, what do? You push for illegal settlements. You get your extreme right-wing supporters to come up with one of these mountaintop settlements that are illegal, and you've put Mr. Bennet in a very tight corner. If he were to dismantle them, he would alienate his right wing. If he were to leave them, he would alienate his left wing. That's going to be the challenge for him. I think otherwise, what Bennet hopes to do is to really improve the lot of both Arab Israelis, that is, those who are citizens of Israel, and the West Bank Palestinians, and to the extent that they can get around Hamas, even the Gaza Palestinians. He'll need to do that because he has Arab support in the Knesset, the parliament, and in his government. But again, whether he can carry that out, it's not clear to me that he can actually make a deal with the Palestinians, because which Palestinians is he going to make a deal with? It's not going to be Hamas. They want to destroy Israel. They want to kill all the Jews, in fact, wherever they are. But it really can't be, and perhaps shouldn't be, with Mohammed Abbas, Abu Mazen. The guy is, sitting as prime minister 10 years after he was supposed to step down or have a new election. And he just postponed another election. He's not really the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. They don't have one right now. Now, if they come up with somebody, then Bennett's got somebody to talk to and deal with. So in the interim, my guess is he will do what I said, improve the lot of the people themselves and simply wait until there's somebody he can deal with. But Netanyahu, who clearly wants to come back in, hasn't even moved out of the prime minister's house yet, and doesn't really want to leave. I think he's going to use these illegal settlements as a vehicle for trying to break the government up. Israel's relationship with the U.S. As of before the election was very, very different from what it was, say, 5 years ago. 5 years ago, you had President Obama in office. It was difficult, very, very difficult. But it was still a bipartisan relationship, even though Mr. Netanyahu was pushing very, very hard for evangelical support at the expense even of the American Jewish community, much less Democrats generally. Remember, Jewish Americans vote overwhelmingly Democratic and they're overwhelmingly liberal. Neither of those adjectives applies to Mr. Netanyahu. He opted to essentially support Republican conservatives. That created problems with the Obama administration, but in a certain sense, it created problems for Israel with America, even during the Trump administration, because although Trump supported just about everything Netanyahu wanted, whether it was recognition of the Golan, whether it was no longer funding the Palestinians, whether it was closing down the consulate in East Jerusalem, whether it was moving the embassy to Jerusalem, whatever it might be, the fact that Netanyahu was so aligned with Trump meant that he was alienating even more than he had during the Obama years. both the Democratic Party and the Jewish American community. So that going into this election, the relationship with Israel was very, very one-sided, not bipartisan at all. And that just meant trouble, because at some point, turned out to be this last election, but at some point, it meant that when the Democrats took over, Israel would have a serious problem. Now, you've had two changes. One, the new Democratic president is Joe Biden, who has long been a friend of Israel, even though Netanyahu insulted him as well. When he came to Israel, Netanyahu was building settlements at the same time. But the other factor, of course, is this new government. And the power behind the government throne, the leader of the largest party in that government, happens to be Yair Lapid, not Mr. Bennett. And Mr. Lapid is a centrist, committed, he's a liberal, and he's committed to repairing relations both with the Democratic Party and with the Jewish American community. So that I think if they can last, if this government can survive a few years, they might help to restore relations with the United States on a much more even keel. Again, if there's progress in dealing with the Palestinians, if at least they show that they're no longer treating their own citizens as second-class citizens and demonstrating they care for the Palestinians outside the Green Line, that'll help even more. Of course, if Netanyahu comes back into power, all this falls apart. But at least for now, with a government led by a man who recognizes that he's got to satisfy both extremes, both sides, and the power behind the throne, the actual prime minister to be, as well as foreign minister, being committed to improving or restoring, I guess is really the right word, relations on a bipartisan basis with the United States. At least there's some hope right now. With respect to other Arab countries, clearly the new government wants to maintain the kinds of relations that have already been set up. Oh, by the way, I should point out that when Mr. Netanyahu first became prime minister in 1996, Israel had relations as a result of what Yitzhak Rabin had done at Oslo. Israel had relations of a sort with 6 Arab countries, but within months, Netanyahu had messed up those relations with 4 of them. This government clearly is not going to do that. Whether they can expand relations to other countries is not at all clear, in part because these other countries are waiting to see what happens with the government, and in part because the Democratic administration just has other priorities than to work on the Saudis, whom they're having difficulties with anyway, to have relationships with the Israelis. But clearly what Israel has already established is likely to stay. So far, it's holding up even after the Hamas war, which clearly was a test of those relations. So again, a new government that is committed to improving the lives of its Arab citizens already is a plus for the Arab countries that have really taken the risk and opened relations with Israel after all these years.